From Bristol, UK, I'm Pommy Harmar.
And I am Melissa Chemam, and this is the Quarantini.
We're bringing you this podcast every week to keep your spirits up and until lockdown in the UK has completely ended.
And though we don't exactly know when that will be, with every week we'll bring you a mix of ingenious responses to the virus.
And creative ideas for the future.
Maybe also a dash of the unexpected.
Welcome to the Quarantini. This is the beginning of Series 2. This week marks the beginning of a slightly new format as we emerge gently out of lockdown into a new world. It's a bit like we're changing the cocktail recipe, Melissa. What do you think?
Sounds great. I totally agree, Pommy. And personally, I'd love to address some of the main issues that we need to bring into a form of positive change, right? Maybe on the theme of the environment, social change, workers' rights, but also energy, transport, how we can better our city here in Bristol, but also elsewhere. Like, you know, we had an interviewee every week, and personally, I'd love to bring in people from other places that I've lived in or that I love, especially like France or Italy and even West Africa and beyond.
Yes, that is our aim, isn't it? To bring you ideas that people have had during lockdown of how they would like the world to change, how they would like their own community to change, and what can be put in place now. So it might be that people have, always wanted more cycle routes in a city. And now we're going to have them. It's happening all over Europe. All cities are replanning their streets. And that is largely as a result of there being a lot less traffic on the street and people have seen what it could be like.
Well, yes, I totally agree with that. And we've seen that with like some signs being added here in Bristol, Berlin and Milan, adding some cycle lines in my hometown Paris as well. It's a huge part of the debate at the moment for the local elections. So it's nice to see as well how so many places in different locations, in different countries have now the same issues, and we can use our energy and compare our experiences to learn from them. And Bristol is a great place to start this discussion. So hopefully we'll hear from you and we'll gain momentum to talk about some of this issue more in depth.
Meanwhile, we have episode 9. Starting the new series. What do we have coming up in today's show?
I think we have an interview. Pommy, tell us more.
We have an interview with Jack Salt. He's a Bristol-based beatboxer. So this is a bit of light relief coming up later. He's talking about how he's adapted his beatboxing business to the virus.
I love that. It's very unexpected in a way. And of course, we'll have the mix-up part of the show, including some of the usual roundup of exciting responses to the coronavirus.
And for the dash of something exciting, we've got music from the Clark family this week, Colt Clark and the Quarantine Kids. This is an amazing family who ordinarily homeschool their 3 children. And what they've done during lockdown is to teach the children a song every other day and put it out on YouTube.
Hey everybody, we're Chloe Friendly and we're going to sing Happy together.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Now, Colt Clark is the dad and he is a professional musician and he plays guitar and sings. Then he's got 2 boys, one of which is an amazing drummer and the other plays bass guitar. And then the 3rd child is a little girl who sings at the front and does funky dance moves. This is all filmed by Colt's wife and their mum, Aubrey. They've even made it onto The Ellen Show.
No matter how they toss the dice, it had to be the only one for me is you, and you for me, so happy together. I can't see me loving nobody but you all my life. When you're with me, baby, the skies will be blue all my life. me as you, and you for me. So happy together, happy together, I wish the weather.
Okay, that was the wondrous Clark family singing Happy Together. I've spent so many diverting hours, for research purposes, watching this family, and they never fail to lift my spirits.
Yes, find them on YouTube and you'll be entertained for hours, just like Pommy was.
Okay, it's now time for our weekly roundup. Let's just remind listeners how they can get hold of us.
Yes, please send us some ideas or share your stories about your lockdown life and how your resilience has been boosted or your plans to change the world at the Quarantini podcast at gmail.com, or send us a message on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram.
So what have we got first on the list, Melissa?
So in terms of change, Bristol has had a busy week, Pommy. What do you think?
We've had a really intense couple of weeks, haven't we?
I don't think anybody has missed what has happened on Sunday last week with the march to support the Black Lives Matter movement. And since then, you know, a lot has been announced to support the BAME communities. As you know, they have already been struck much harder by the COVID-19 crisis because a lot of them are nurses or working for the NHS. A lot of them are key workers, so they have been directly exposed, but also they have got a higher rate of infection with the disease. So what we can see is that the fall of this statue of Edward Colston, symbolizing, you know, the oppression and the slavery past of Bristol, but the whole of the UK as well, has started an interesting debate. And I wrote about it. I think you've talked about it on Ujima, obviously. And now we've already seen a lot of change happening. And the Colston Hall had promised to change the name. Now they're saying they're going to announce the new name before September. And a lot of Caribbean British people, especially filmmakers and artists, have launched project and fundraising appeals. I'm just going to give you one example because there are many, but we'll get back to that. It's one project called Bristol African Caribbean Cultural Space. So the idea is to have a place in Bristol to display more of artists discussing the history of Caribbean people in the UK. They have a page on GoFundMe, Bristol African Caribbean Cultural Space. They've already raised a lot, and it started by Michael Jenkins, who's done a lot of films, and he's also worked with Lawrence Hu, who's having his own projects. So, you know, it feels exciting because Bristol is at the heart of a lot of interesting positive changes, not only difficult conversation.
Absolutely. And I think one of the exciting things about the protest in Bristol last Sunday was that it was organised and led by young people. It was so passionate and so peaceful. And I thought we should celebrate what young people are achieving, not only here in Bristol, but right the way around the world around coronavirus. We found young people doing amazing things in Malaysia, India, and Cameroon, just to name 3 countries out of many.
Yeah, I totally agree, Pommy. You know, it was a year of protest in many countries around the world. So one group that was hit particularly hard by the restrictions obviously have been refugees. I've been working with refugees for years. So there are nearly 180,000 refugees and asylum seekers in Malaysia. And the majority of them are persecuted minorities from Myanmar. And Malaysia doesn't really legally recognize refugee rights or refugee status. So that means some adults have no rights and children cannot even attend school. What is brilliant is that IDK, a 26-year-old woman who runs this NGO, Refuge for Refugees, has provided schooling for children. And she said the restriction had a big impact on an already vulnerable group. They have collected a list of 1,000 people each week registering for food aid, and they also have delivered that food to more than 41,000 people across nearly 1,000 locations. And they deliver the food themselves with 2 delivery days each week and 90 volunteers.
That's extraordinary, and Heidi's only 26. And in Cameroon, which is currently the worst hit country in Central African region, another 26-year-old called Ashaleke Christian has brought together his friends and colleagues to start manufacturing and delivering free hand sanitizer to Cameroonians. And he's turned his office into a lab. How amazing is that? He's invested his salary and redirected part of a grant he received for his conflict work, which is what he normally does, to buy sterilisation equipment. And he's organised a whole team of volunteers, bringing in a young medical doctor, a young nurse, 2 pharmacists and a water hygiene engineer. And now more than 350 young volunteers have joined his efforts and produced more than 15,000 bottles and distributed them to more than 12,000 households in 70 communities across the country. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
It's brilliant. Well, great form of resilience. Continuing the list, in India, a young pediatrician from Delhi, the Dr. Radhika Batra, realized that people might well end up dying of hunger rather than the virus itself when the curfew was imposed. So she organized the delivery of groceries to 850 people, plus, of course, delivery of PPE to health workers, including more than 1,000 masks, face shields, hazmat suits, bottles of sanitizers and protective goggles. All of these items were paid for through donations from individual donors, families and societies, and of course a crowdfunding campaign. You can find more online about her and her crowdfunding.
So that's 3 young people all over the world doing amazing things and inspiring other people to do it with them.
Yeah, luckily maybe we'll be able to speak with some of them one day in this podcast.
That's a great idea. We'll try that.
Now, we have our interview for you.
Yes, this is the main interview of the show. And this week, for a bit of light relief, we have Jack Salt. If you remember, we had a tiny snatch of some beatboxing at the end of last week's episodes. And I was delighted to catch up with him this week and find out more about it. So, Jack, you're a beatboxer. How did you become a beatboxer?
Well, I started quite late, actually. Lots of beatboxers tend to start when they're about 2 years old these days. But I started when I moved out to Spain when I was 21. I started beatboxing to kind of entertain myself as I walked around the streets of southern Spain. And then I met other people who were rappers and singers and musicians, and I found that we all wanted to practice our things. So I found myself like a kind of portable drum machine for all these other people.
I've seen you perform in Bristol with the Murmuration Choir. That was quite a thing. So there you were doing your beatboxing with this whole choir surrounding you. How was that?
Amazing. Yeah, that gig you were at was probably my favourite gig that we've done as well with Cosmo Sheldrake at Trinity Centre. Playing with the choir is amazing. It's quite a rush to be, I don't know, to be able to beatbox with. I mean, we're up to like 72 people before lockdown came in, so it's amazing. It's just amazing being around so many incredible voices and feeling all of those frequencies flying about the place. It's quite an amazing feeling, and also great to be able to sing as well. I've been really enjoying learning how to sing more through that project as well.
And you mentioned that you teach beatboxing, and of course we've gone into lockdown. So tell me how that's going. How have you had to change the way you teach?
Before lockdown, I was teaching. I'm also an English teacher as well, so I was teaching beatbox and English. And then lockdown kicked in, and suddenly, I lost almost all of my English classes because they all had to move back to Spain because they lost all their jobs. And I started, suggesting to some of my students that we switch over to Zoom. And I gave it a go. I was a bit skeptical to see whether it would work because you can't do anything at the same time. It's very, because of the latency, because of the delay, you have to wait. And I gave it a go and it worked. And then I put up a couple of videos on Facebook, and they just had an incredible response of people. And I went from having maybe 3 private students to having 15 in about 2 weeks after lockdown started. So I'd actually managed to, in a different way, find about as much work as I had before lockdown started, basically, which was crazy.
It's an extraordinary thing that you've learnt to do. What's the history of beatboxing? Who was the first beatboxer?
Some of the first beatboxers were people like Dougie Fresh was one of them, and I think Bismarcky was another one as well. So this is like in the early days when hip hop was starting in the 80s out in the States, and there was a machine called a beatbox, like an actual physical machine where you could program simple beats into it and it would loop around this beat so that the early rappers could practice their beats. But basically this thing was too expensive for people like living in poor parts of cities who were basically the people emceeing, so they couldn't afford these machines. And then some people had the bright idea of imitating this machine, which was called a beatbox, and that's where the term human beatbox came about. This is just completely my guess, but I reckon it's the fastest growing instrument in the world because it is incredible how many new beatboxers there are every day and how good they are, and they're all over the world, and it's all being spread around kind of YouTube tutorials, and there's all these beatbox battles and competitions happening everywhere, and it's a community that learns very quickly off each other. And because it's an instrument that's relatively new, it's still being discovered. What the world champion is doing 1 week is then, everyone can do it within a few weeks and they're having to find something different to do to be original. So it's constantly, the boundaries are being pushed and new sounds are being brought out all the time. And the fact that we all have different mouths as well is an interesting part about of it, because beatboxing is a lot more original. Like there are sounds that only some people can do, and everyone has their strengths and weaknesses within it, and it's very much to do with their mouths. It's very much to do with the language that their natural way of speaking in their own language, for example, and the influences that they have musically. So it's a big world, and it's growing exponentially in crazy ways.
Do you have to have a lot of breath for it? It feels like you have to have a lot of breath.
Not really. I mean, I think from doing it, you do like generally build up a bigger kind of lung capacity, but you actually make sounds breathing in quite a lot. So it looks like you're hyperventilating half of the time when you don't know what people are doing. It looks like you're going, like the way you're breathing is more like and then you're just finding ways to breathe in, but in fact it's quite shallow breathing. So if I'm doing a beat like for that, I'm actually breathing really shallow. I'm actually just going. So it's actually really shallow breathing. It's not very. I'm not hyperventilating at all. So you find sounds that go that you can make when you're breathing out and when you're breathing in.
Oh, that's fascinating. So Jack, just finally, perhaps you could give us a little bit of a run around what you can do with your mouth and your breath.
Okay, I don't really know what I'm going to do. Let's have a go.
Wow, fabulous. So many different noises came out of you then. That was just extraordinary. Thank you so much, Jack, for talking to us today and for sharing a Quarantini with us, a beatboxing Quarantini. So that was Jack Salt talking to me about his beatboxing. So that's it for the Quarantini this week. We'll be back next week with a new cocktail of ideas and positive news for you all.
And remember, this is series 2, so it's going to be a bit different with exploring different themes. So what would be great is to hear from you as well. You can get hold of us by emailing us at thequarantinipodcast@gmail.com.
And we're also on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram.
This podcast was hosted by me, Melissa Chemam.
And was hosted and produced by me, Pommy Harmar.
Thanks for listening.
And stay safe.